Hey everyone, and welcome back to my kitchen. I'm Bethany, and today we're gonna make one of my favorite foods of all time, which is lasagna bolognese. We're combining bolognese sauce, which is my favorite sauce ever, and lasagna into one dish, and it becomes the richest, most flavorful lasagna I've personally ever had and I've ever made. So I'm really excited to show you how to make it because it is fantastic. So let's get into it. Okay, so first thing that we want to get going is our pot of water for the lasagna. This is going to take a little bit to boil. So what we have is a really tall pot here because the lasagna noodles are pretty tall, so we want to be able to fit them all in here. And I'm going to season this generously with a nice spoonful of salt. We want to make sure that the lasagna has flavor, and you can always be overly generous with the salt in the pasta water. So we're going to cover this and let it simmer until it's boiling. So our pasta water is ready. We're gonna add our pasta. Then the next step is we have to stir this. So even though the pasta is kind of sticking out of the pot, that's okay. It's going to soften and just kind of sink down in there. And then we'll cook this until the pasta is al dente. So now that we've drained the pasta, what my mom always taught me with lasagna is if you're not ready, what you need to do, because if you leave it like this, then the noodles will stick together, which we don't want. So I have a dish that has some cold water in it. So we're just gonna transfer carefully, because these can still be really hot, the noodles into this cold dish. And this is gonna keep them from sticking together. So, and you can kind of lay them flat like they would be in a lasagna so they don't lose their shape or get broken. And next, we're gonna make our ricotta filling. And I'm doing a ricotta filling today because I don't typically like a bechamel sauce, which is very traditional in a lot of lasagna bolognese recipes. I just think that the rich bolognese and a rich bechamel sauce, it just is too heavy for me personally, and I love the ricotta filling. I think it adds a really nice creaminess, but it's not overbearing, kind of like the rich bechamel sauce is. That's just my personal opinion, but you can use bechamel if you'd like. But this recipe, we're gonna kind of do an American Italian style lasagna. So we're gonna do 1 heaping cup of ricotta cheese, and then we're going to add 2/3 cup of freshly grated Parmigiano Reggiano, and then we're going to do 1 egg so that we can bind all the ingredients together. And next, we're going to do a generous amount of chopped fresh basil and oregano. Mostly fresh basil, but just about 2 teaspoons of fresh oregano, just because it's a little bit more pungent in flavor. And shout out to Zwilling, they sent me this knife as a gift just the other day, and it is very sharp and very nice. A lot of my chef knives are actually pretty inexpensive, so this is definitely the nicest one I have. So thank you, Zwilling. Not sponsored, but they just sent it to me as a gift. And because we're using so much herbs, I mean, this is about 1/4 cup of chopped herbs. And I just think that a lasagna, it can be a little bit heavy, so the fresh herbs add just a little bit of lightness and a bright flavor throughout the whole thing. So I love using lots and lots of fresh basil. Now we'll put this in. Trying not to cut myself with this knife. It is very, very sharp. Next, we're gonna add the garlic. I actually like to use the zester or cheese grater that I used with the Parmesan, just because it chops it really nice and small. But again, speaking of cutting yourself, I shred my finger on this all the time. You kind of just want to stop with the garlic before it's actually finished on here so that you don't shred your finger with it, like I do almost every time I use this. Then lastly, a little bit of salt. We're gonna do 1/4 teaspoon. And then 1/4 teaspoon black pepper. And now we're gonna mix this together. Okay, now we can get ready to layer the lasagna. What are you doing? What do you want? What? You want the cheese, don't you? So I have my bolognese sauce here. It's actually cold because I made it yesterday. And if you want to know how to make that, we already did a video on how to make this. It's a little bit more of a process, so I didn't include it in this video. But this is a really rich and hearty meat sauce. It's seriously my favorite thing to pair with pasta. And so it has lots of flavor. It's simmered with some red wine, some pancetta and pork and beef, and a little bit of sofrito, which is some vegetables. And then we're going to layer that with our ricotta filling, more Parmigiano Reggiano, and freshly grated mozzarella so we get some creamy melted cheese. And then we have our cooked lasagna noodles, which are in the water bath, and they're looking great because we don't want them sticking and then they just become a hot mess. So now we're going to layer. First, we're going to put a nice spoonful on the bottom of our baking dish of bolognese sauce. And since this is refrigerated, it's a little more stiff. So I gotta spread it out a little bit. I didn't wanna heat this up and then heat it up in the oven. It will loosen up as it cooks with the lasagna. We just wanna spread this, a thin layer on the bottom. Then next we're going to add the lasagna noodles. So since they're in water, we're just gonna kind of shake off the excess water. And I do have a towel here just to kind of pat some of that extra water off. We're gonna lay that on the bottom. Next, ricotta cheese. And we only wanna do thin layers throughout the whole lasagna. Otherwise, it gets too just filled with ingredients and it cannot really hold the slices together. I'm guilty of that. I always overfill the lasagna. So we just want to do thin layers, especially of the ricotta cheese, just because there's so many layers in the lasagna, it will all come together in the end. Then after the ricotta, we do more bolognese sauce. And again, just a thin layer. Then we sprinkle on top some freshly grated mozzarella and then Parmigiano Reggiano. Then we go back in with the noodles and then we're gonna repeat all the layers until we get to the top. For the final layer of sauce, I like to put a little bit more of a generous amount just because I want to cover all the noodles and all the little things that are kind of poking out so that they don't crisp or dry out. Unless you like a little crispy edge of a lasagna, some people do. And then a little bit more of a generous topping of cheese. Want to make sure that most of this is covered so that we get a nice cheesy top. And then I'm about to cover it with foil, but I kind of want to just make sure that the cheese is down because there's nothing worse than the foil pulling off all the cheese. So that's why you don't want to over pile the pan. So just kind of patting it down and then we're going to cover it with foil. And I like to kind of just tent the foil just a little bit, whatever I can do to avoid it from sticking onto the cheese top. Okay, now we're gonna bake this in the oven at 375 degrees for 20 minutes covered with foil and then 20 minutes uncovered. And then I like to do a little bit of a broil at the end so we get a nice browned cheesy top. So we're gonna get this in the oven. Now for the best part, we get to taste this lasagna. It smells so good and looks incredible. There's nothing better than homemade lasagna. Truly, it is my favorite food ever. So I cannot wait to taste this. It's so good. Best lasagna ever. And that says a lot because I absolutely adore my sweet and spicy Italian sausage lasagna. That's always been my favorite. But this one, I think, takes the cake for the best I've ever had. And I've made lasagna al forno, which is the classic meat sauce lasagna with bechamel. And I'm sorry, I know it's just an unpopular opinion, but I'm not the biggest fan of bechamel in lasagna. As I stated earlier, I just think it's overly heavy and rich. And the first few bites of a lasagna with bechamel are delicious, but I can only have a few bites before it starts to feel too much. So this is perfect, it's delicious, it's comforting, and the bolognese just makes it sing with that rich flavor. And that sauce has that nice red wine, white wine flavor in it, whichever wine you used. And that adds such a lovely layer of flavor in this. So I hope you guys get to try this recipe because truly it's the lasagna of all lasagnas. You gotta try it. So I hope you guys love it as much as I do. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next recipe.